Good morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Callaghan. I am a senior analyst with 451 Research. I'm in a practice group at 451 called Infrastructure Computing for the Enterprise. What we do there is we cover, well, infrastructure computing. My specialty is infrastructure management. That includes IT performance management, IT service and asset management, IT business financial management, a few other little things coming in here and there, but basically I cover the software that manages your IT environments. One of the big coverage focuses for us within that space is IT management as a service. That's kind of driving our research right now. That is where all of our, where we see a lot of the funding coming into the space now is coming in at, and that's what we're going to be talking about here today. So I'm just going to run through some slides, and oh, that's our logo, good. Okay, how do businesses use cloud computing? This is, every time you say you work for a research firm, people want hard metrics, so that's what I brought here today. ChangeWave Insight Corporate Cloud Computing Trends just came out last month. 72% of businesses surveyed, about 450 businesses, various sizes, 72% are using SaaS today. I think it's a pretty healthy number, and as you can see, it's far outpacing infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. Okay, and that trend's going to continue. This is what the cloud computing spending looks like for the next 6 months. 32% of respondents are going to increase their spending on SaaS. Healthy increases, but a little bit smaller for infrastructure and platform. And so let's go on to another survey we did. This is actually the overall metrics. This is infrastructure software as a service, IT management as a service. I mentioned that before. We also include here online backup services, cloud archiving services. Now this is interesting. I mean, if we were on this stage, I don't know, 8, 10 years ago maybe, the conventional wisdom back then was that IT wanted nothing to do with SaaS, right? It was all, Salesforce.com was going around IT, selling directly into sales and marketing and customer service departments. IT was trying to block them. I would talk to IT people at SAP conferences and they would say, we want nothing to do with SaaS. We don't want Salesforce.com in our environments. Anyway, this is all SaaS services that are used by IT departments. And right now we have that as almost a $2 billion business this year, and it's going to double in about, 3 years. So we're going to be about $4 billion in 3 years, about 29% compound annual growth rate. So not bad at all. And just a shameless plug for some of my upcoming research, performance management in the cloud. I literally just fired off the latest draft of that this morning in my hotel room. That's going to come out before the end of the month, I hope. IT service management moves to the cloud. We'll be talking a lot about ServiceNow in that report, and that should be coming out early next year. And then we just have our regular coverage in our daily market insight service. And that's all I have. So we're going to go right to our all-star panel. I'm pretty excited about the panelists that are here today. I helped pick a few of them. So why don't we just start by having all you guys introduce yourselves. And I'll start with Antonio Piraino, my former colleague at 451, from ScienceLogic, CTO of ScienceLogic. Antonio?
Thanks, Dennis. Yes, Antonio Piraino from ScienceLogic. We're a software company. We do monitoring and management technology for inside of your data center facilities, monitoring and managing the IT infrastructure that you operate on a day-to-day basis, having initially developed the software to be delivered as an appliance, and then our customers slowly pushed us into a virtual environment and then more into a hosted sort of SaaS environment as well, for the purposes of delivering monitoring and management capabilities, which in our world means everything from alerting, eventing, displaying the monitoring all the way through to the automated runbook capabilities as well. 10-year-old company based in Northern Virginia, but offices worldwide.
And you just rolled out SaaS this year, right?
We actually rolled it out last year. Yeah, and again, based on, and it's interesting, I don't want to get into it too much at this point, I don't know if you want me to, but yeah, we rolled it out last year, again, based on customer demand. But it's interesting, a lot of the demand really started on the West Coast, which seems to be a little bit more advanced in that requirement. But a lot of I just want to make sure that people aren't always confused between the subscription model and the SaaS model, because we've had a subscription model that has completely, dominated the way in which we build customers over the last few years that our customers have pushed us to, and then a SaaS model, which is really the delivery model, which seem to be two mutually exclusive models.
Okay. And the company, I think, needs no introduction. They pretty much defined this space almost 10 years ago right now, ServiceNow. And Arne Josefsberg, the CTO of ServiceNow, is here today. Arne?
Thank you. Yes, CTO at ServiceNow, Arne Josefsberg. I've been there about a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I spent some 26 years at Microsoft building cloud infrastructure, Windows Azure, and other cloud computing components. And what we do is really a service automation platform for IT. We make IT more efficient. All your kind of traditional ITIL processes are now underpinned by our automation. We think of our system as the single system of record for IT. If you spend time in IT, you know that everyone's got hundreds of fragmented tools. It's very hard to manage IT end to end. So we really see ourselves as the integration point, this single system of record or a single pane of glass for IT. And what we're finding is the way we're automating IT processes are also relevant to other service domains like HR and financial management. So we sort of see ServiceNow spreading sort of beyond the realms of IT now.
And we have a representative from Montclare Advisors, Kevin Dobbs. Montclare has helped get a lot of companies that you've heard about as SaaS companies. Montclare has helped get them to that point. Kevin, why don't you tell us more about what you guys are doing at Montclare?
Thanks, Dennis. So Kevin Dobbs, and I'm the founder and CEO at Montclare. Really what we are is we're an advisory firm, but we're very data-driven. So we've been doing this for about 5 years where we're helping software companies primarily move into SaaS. So I know Antonio mentioned it being a delivery model. Our kind of position is really it's a business model change. So anybody who's been through kind of the traditional software world and gone and worked at a SaaS company, there's a big cultural change, the way you sell products, the way you deliver them, the way you price them, everything is quite different. So what we do is we help companies build those strategies. How are you going to do it? We help them with financial modeling, because a lot of it is, all of a sudden you're getting your cash over time as opposed to upfront. We help them with that. And then we also help them around kind of various business dimensions. How do you sell and market your products? How do you deliver them in the cloud? And then also, how do you build a customer success organization that helps you maintain high renewal rates, upsell, cross-sell? We also do a pretty deep research project every year where we cover the top 250 SaaS companies. And what we do is we're in the process of doing that right now. I feel your pain going through and collecting all this data. We're probably collecting 60 data points on each company that we're analyzing in the report. Obviously, Splunk's in that and ServiceNow's in that. And what we're looking for is we try to find pattern matches of what makes really good SaaS companies. And there are lots of different models out there today. So we take a lot of that data and we build it back into our consulting practice and help our clients, be successful with the SaaS model.
And at the end there, we have a representative from another tremendous success story in the IT management space. Over the last decade, not even a decade, was it 8 years or something? Anyway, Dan Deklich, VP of Cloud from Splunk. Splunk didn't start out in the cloud, but we're expecting them at 451 to be a real credible player in the cloud. Dan?
Thank you, Dennis. So my name is Dan Deklich. I have been now with Splunk a little bit less than a year. Prior to Splunk, I was a CTO at NICE Systems, and prior to that, Yahoo Research and IBM Research. So pretty much, in other words, I have been in the cloud pretty much most of my career. Splunk itself, we have been around 10 years. We actually celebrated. We had a big party a couple of days ago in the office. 10 years in the Valley is not that easy. Not everybody gets there. And the product that we offer, I would assume almost everybody in this room is familiar with and runs in some form or the other. We are about the log ingestion, log processing, and analytics on top of the machine data. And for the first 8 years of the company, we had only an on-prem software solution. 2 years ago, we launched Splunk Storm, which is our multi-tenanted solution in the cloud. And then a couple of months ago, we launched Splunk Cloud, which is a single-tenant, multi-instance, very large data sets environment in Amazon AWS.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. All right, so we talked in the slides I ran through in the beginning about who SaaS adoption, how companies are buying into SaaS. But I think when this model was first taking off, it was a lot of I think the conventional wisdom was that this was more of a something small to medium businesses would start with, and then the enterprises would follow. I'm curious from your guys' perspective, where are we right now? Are enterprises buying into SaaS? Is it still being driven by the SMBs? I mean, Arne, you guys have been in this game the longest. What are you guys seeing?
Well, we, as you probably know, we target large enterprises, Global 2000s, so big companies. And like I mentioned, I've been at ServiceNow for about 2.5 years, a little less. And when I started, and we kind of sell through the CIO or the level below CIO. And at that time, 2.5 years ago, the CIO would ask, why should we use cloud? What are the benefits? That's sort of the mentality going into it, into a discussion. Convince me why I should use cloud. I got to say, just 2.5 years later, the mentality has changed dramatically. I wouldn't say across the board. It varies by industry and geography, but the majority of our new prospective customers think of sort of a cloud first. Sort of the question has changed from why should I use cloud to when there's a new project, why aren't we using cloud to solve this business problem? So I've seen a very marked difference in mentality, generally in the US among enterprises. I'd say, I just came back from a trip to Brazil. There are countries like Brazil, Germany that are perhaps 2-3 years behind, but I'd say the core of the enterprise business today is starting to adopt sort of a cloud-first attitude.
Okay. Kevin, what are you guys seeing? I mean, what are you telling your clients that you're advising? What's the opportunity there?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of our clients that we talk to, the first thing that when they're thinking about moving from one model to the other, you talk to the CEO and they're saying, the last thing I want to do is cannibalize my existing revenue. I don't want to go after the enterprise. So what we're going to do is we're going to go after the SMB market first. Almost every single client says that. What's interesting is when they launch their product, one of the first adopters is usually big enterprises. And I think what we're seeing happening in Europe right now, there's a huge adoption of SaaS and a lot of interest in SaaS. And our perspective is really that, the financial crisis in 2008, as well as the economic problems in Europe, kind of forced organizations to think through what they're doing with their IT systems. And so if they could start achieving any type of cost savings, they were very open to listening to that. And so what I think you see is companies starting small, they'll try a little pilot project, they'll start that. As long as that works, that kind of bears some fruit, they'll do a little bit more. And then what you're seeing is organizations rolling out pretty large implementations of SaaS products. So I think as long as the economics start making sense, there's pressure on the IT organization to look at cloud-based alternatives. We were talking earlier, one of the big things we see is that companies are realizing how expensive it is to upgrade infrastructure. You've got this 2 to 3 year upgrade cycle. If there was a way that you can eliminate that, I think a lot of companies are very open to that, especially the big enterprises.
Yeah.
Sure. Dan, Splunk just a few months ago made its all of its software available as a cloud service. So I take it you must be seeing a lot of demand from enterprises as well.
We see a lot of very interesting demand out there. On one hand, you have all the little startups in the valley, all the smaller, younger companies that are jumping onto the cloud solution, obviously, as you would expect. But the thing that blew my mind is exactly what you point out. Enterprises want the cloud. They get it, they understand it's cheaper, they don't want to maintain the hardware, software, they don't want to upgrade these things, they don't want to deal with the complexity. So if they push it over to us, push it over to the cloud, life is infinitely easier for them. So I'm very much looking forward to see how this progresses. On one hand, enterprises, to me that was interesting. I now want to see the governments and the government agencies embrace cloud more and more. And to me, that's another issue where you start entering into different sets of security requirements. It's a bit different than the enterprise market.
So what's your perspective at ScienceLogic, Antonio? Because you guys have traditionally sold more towards managed service providers, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, look, I mean, we still have, being in the DC area, we have a lot of federal customers as well, and a lot of enterprises, but overwhelmingly it's more and more service providers. And a lot of those service providers have backed into being service providers from being resellers or systems integrators as well, that are very familiar and intimately involved, and often the trusted advisors of enterprises. But what we're seeing is that, frankly, a lot of the larger enterprises, I guess the way to approach this, somebody said it the other day that I was in a meeting with, they were talking to a bunch of software vendors, and they said, don't come at me with a revolutionary approach. So all of us have fantastic pieces of software that are relatively modern in the era of IT, but most enterprises cannot afford to suddenly simply shift over everything into a new cloud environment necessarily, or into a SaaS model. So I'm taking a bit of an alternative approach, but I think most large enterprises feel that it has to be evolutionary. You might have a revolutionary product and a revolutionary way to drive my application, but this has to be evolutionary, and I'm not prepared to take any of my legacy products and move it over anytime soon. So what we're seeing more from the enterprise is more of the greenfield applications that are moving over to SaaS. I would suggest for a second that actually when we back up and look at the cloud altogether, it was really driven by SMB first and foremost, probably because, to make it simplistic, they had fewer applications, right, that they could go and run in the cloud, driven by the email and then CRM and so on, not quite as many. Now you get to large enterprise who've been watching, beady-eyed at how this move to the cloud has taken place, and I'd say what's slowly taking place is less and less of a tactical move by independent IT departments and more of a strategic move to look at it from a total cost of ownership, which is not always clear for most enterprises. It doesn't always make financial sense right away. It's a delicate approach. But I think there's second order effects that they're realizing very quickly that, hold on, once I see how quickly I can get to market with these SaaS-like products and these cloud-like products, particularly when it comes to the organizations that are here on stage, we're not your traditional sort of consumer-facing SaaS that would have existed 5 to 10 years ago. We're enterprise-grade operations type of SaaS modules that are benefiting customers when they look at the total cost of ownership, the rapidness and the modernity that's needed to now run IT in this highly regulated environment. That can be a hindrance, but also more and more I think people are discovering that various SaaS and cloud providers actually do abide by many of the regulatory requirements, even better than they would internally for an enterprise. And that's significantly changing the world. So bottom line is we're seeing this hybrid approach, and we're having to take a hybrid approach because of it to manage all of that, help them manage all of it.
I mean, in the industry analyst world, we're always talking about enterprise IT as a service, right? Your IT department being a service provider to the rest of your business units. You guys sell to that service provider space. I mean, you must be right on the front lines there is enterprise IT acting like a service provider yet? Are we there yet?
Yes, it's a slow move because there are obviously a lot of egos involved, and I mean, to be very frank, I think that's what a lot of it is about. Often we walk in often behind our MSPs and we see what they're talking to their enterprise IT departments as well. Who are slowly but surely becoming service orchestrators, as you talked about. That means they can afford, as a CIO, for example, in an enterprise, you can afford to spend slightly less time being tactically involved in the in-house deployment of your infrastructure and start to make wiser decisions that are based on finances, regulation, governance, and security to an external environment. But they need that, at the end of the day, it's about that trusted advisor role, and that's where we see our MSP starting to play more and more of a role in that regard. And certainly, we enable them to offer SaaS capabilities to their customers, and we're seeing that take up boom more and more. When you look at all the growth in IT around the world, it's all shifting more and more into these cloud environments.
Sure. Okay, we'll come back to the MSP question a little bit later. But this is an infrastructure audience here today. So does it matter where SaaS runs? I mean, I know ScienceLogic and ServiceNow are both using colo data centers. Splunk is using AWS, right, Dan?
Yep.
What are some of the considerations you come up with to determine where you should have your software as a service offering running? Arne?
As you mentioned, we're using colo, and we're, as an enterprise SaaS provider, Dan mentioned government. We're actually very successful in government. We received a FISMA authorization last year, and we're working on FedRAMP. So if you look at the security, the first question that comes up when you're in front of a CIO about adopting a SaaS solution is security. So the ability to control your stack end to end, integrate it deeply with security, getting all the right certifications, ISO, SSA 16, SOC 2, FISMA, FedRAMP, it sort of requires you to own the stack end to end. So I think for a true enterprise cloud or SaaS company like ours, being in a colo environment where we can manage the stack end to end, one from a security perspective, but also from a availability perspective, where we can control sort of instant. We built a high availability architecture where we can instantly fail over to an alternate data center. So these are kind of deep investments that we felt we had to do to be successful with pharma, financial institutions, government agencies.
Sure. But AWS works for Splunk, Dan.
AWS works really good for us, and to me it was interesting what you just said about FedRAMP. For those who haven't seen, FedRAMP is this security template PDF that's 850 pages long. So if you ever print something like that out, you just have your mind completely blown with all these security requirements that are coming towards you. And I was very clear, as soon as I saw that no, I do not want to run this in my own data center. I want to run this on top of somebody who has already achieved FedRAMP status, and AWS has done that. But then at the same time, for the enterprises, the thing we see, they use AWS. They use it internally. They have embraced it. They have a process. They have a way to control how much data people are sending to AWS. And we sort of fit in very, very nicely into the environments in there. So for us, simply due to the customer base, it made perfect sense to go AWS. And at the moment, I have to say, I love them.
Okay. Kevin, what do you tell your clients?
Well, we do a lot of financial analysis. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a client who's a managed service provider who's trying to advise their clients on what to do. But we think AWS is a good platform for a lot of use cases. We think Colo in some cases, especially for the larger ISVs. I think, once you reach, what we've found is once you reach about $100 million in revenue, all of a sudden it starts making a lot more sense for you to operate your own, environment. And if you look at, I'm sure ServiceNow has their own configuration of how they're doing it. Obviously, Salesforce.com has a way of doing it. For the smaller companies, it's not really feasible for them to do that. They can't afford it. They don't have the people. They don't have the expertise. So I think it's kind of a spectrum between, AWS on one end to maybe a whole managed service on the other end. And where we see a lot of traditional companies is what they're doing is they're taking their single tenant application and putting it up with a managed service provider. Not so much even about the cost implications. It's really security, the idea of honoring an SLA. What's an SLA? How do we sell this? What's all the expertise that goes into selling these type of solutions to big companies? I mean, a big financial institution is going to put a SaaS company through a huge amount of hurdles before they're actually going to sign a contract with them. So most ISVs don't have that expertise in-house to do that. So they're looking for a partner maybe on that far end of the spectrum, whereas AWS is going to really require you've got more of that expertise in-house. So I think it really depends on who you sell to, the type of products you're selling, and what kind of security or SLAs you want to deliver.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. We have a lot of MSPs who are selling to large enterprise and federal organizations, and they simply don't feel comfortable hosting anything, even a monitoring management system, externally on an Amazon environment. So hosting it within a colo environment just gives them one more level of feeling of security, or that they're not tightrope walking any regulatory implications that they need to. But I think more so, we also, when we look at it from our own configuration, we just liked having core kernel access because of the way we configured things. Having said that, now we have more and more customers and more MSPs actually who a year or two ago would have seen Amazon as the big bad enemy. We're actually now covertly starting to use Amazon on their own backends. And because of that, not only do we instrument against AWS's APIs, but we've actually had to produce a proxy that resides within Amazon that has a VPN connection for all those private cloud environments, whether enterprise or MSP based as well. So for our own personal ability to run SaaS, we choose to run it in a data center for configuration and regulatory and so on requirements. But where customers demand that it becomes an AWS solution, we can run that too. There's one more thing I'd add, and that is, you mentioned security, and I think that is critical on day one when it comes to considerations about running in a SaaS environment or cloud. But I think day two, it's about performance as well. And so that's one more issue that we had to consider as well, where no matter what the application, customers are starting to become more and more concerned with quality of service and that noisy neighbor impact. And we're starting to hear more and more noise about that coming out of things like Amazon and so on. So for us, having the ability to create high IOPS and dedicated IOPS availability and to our customers, even for our own application, let alone every other application they're running, our ability to control that with solid-state disks, for example, and so on, really meant that we were going to be better off operating inside a colo environment.
And kind of a follow-up question a lot of people have, to AWS versus colo, is single instance versus multi-tenant. You guys on stage here are all single instance, correct?
So I have both the multi-tenant and a single-tenant environment. Storm is multi-tenanted, and Splunk Cloud is the single-tenant. And to me, it comes down again to the customer. The security requirements, the platform as a service requirements, essentially, are the ones that would drive you more towards the single instance environment. And the multi-tenanted environment would be, or at least in our world, is intended for the simpler use cases, smaller customers, essentially a way to get the product to the wide masses so they can pump their data in. But for large enterprises, we still believe that the single-tenant view is the correct view.
Arne?
Yeah, I think it's that question has sort of become a red herring, in my opinion.
It used to be a big debate too.
Yeah, we actually have an architecture we call multi-instance architecture to kind of get away from these loaded terms. And what I mean by that is, we talked about financial institutions, governments. When we talk to them, security, data integrity is a huge issue. And they really don't want to, for some of these institutions, they don't want their data to be intermingled with other customers' data. So the way we solve that is by, at logical level, we isolate each customer in their own sort of logical container. So you're kind of single instance at logical level, but then of course, you want to get the economies of scale and benefits of cloud. And what's driving your costs there? Well, it's the hardware and the data center and the power. So we run shared hardware infrastructure with logically isolated customers at the logical level. So I kind of call it best of both worlds. It's a combination of sort of single tenant, logically, multi-tenant, physically, and you bring it together and you sort of get essentially best of both worlds.
I think ours is probably the opposite. I think we're physically single tenant inside a data center, for example, but from the beginning of our development, everything inside the product is multi-tenant, from the point of discovery all the way through runbook automation. And so we've had to be certified at a federal level credentially. So we absolutely, the bottom line is every single constituent who logs in and wants to see just their infrastructure or just their service is able to do so in an automated way. We use this concept of templates, which are highly rigorously tested from a security perspective. But effectively, that's why MSPs typically come our way, is because of that inherent multi-tenancy to their business, where they have to consolidate, as you said, as many of the tool sets that they have, yet ultimately show a different and specific view to each one of their downstream customers. And as enterprises start operating more like service providers themselves internally, so we're discovering there's a different set of metrics that matter differently to an executive, to a marketing group, to an operations team, the NOC, the SOC, and so on and so forth. And so we've had multi-tenancy from the bottom up, and it has to be automated as well, which means that we have to tie it in to all of the access control systems as much as possible as well. So again, physically single tenant, but multi-tenant in all of its functionality, because more and more people are becoming multi-tenant in the way they operate.
Kevin, Arne said it was a red herring. Do you see that from your
I totally agree
perspective?
with that. I mean, I think what we talk to clients about is not so much, we don't want to get in that religious battle of single tenant, multi-tenant. You know, I think it's all based on your business model and your use case. What we do is we usually talk to them about what are you trying to do with the product over time. I mean, if you're trying to reach millions of customers, if you don't use multi-tenant, some sort of highly scalable architecture, it's just going to be too expensive. You'll never make any money. If you're highly secure, you've got to deal with enterprises or governments and they need full isolation, and you're only going to sell maybe 50 or 60 of these instances over time, then yeah, single tenant might make sense. So what we try and do is put some constructs in place where we can do some cost modeling. You know, you did the best of both worlds, so I think that's what we encourage customers to do, is get away from thinking about it from the technology perspective, because the biggest cost you have in your data center environment is your people. So I've heard this automation. That's one thing that we talk a lot about. It's how do you provide really good service securely with the fewest number of people? I mean, we love models where Dropbox is a good example. So they raised $250 million in their Series B, which probably was the largest one I've ever heard of before. When they made the announcement about that, the thing that really stuck in my mind was they said the year before they were 40 million in revenue, they had 4 million customers, and they had 70 employees. So in the way we look at it, that's a home run. There aren't very many companies that can do that.
Sure.
The year they announced that they got the $250 million, they said their revenues had gone to 250. They had now had 44 million customers, and they had 77 employees. So with the net 7 new employees, they had added $210 million worth of revenue and 40 million customers. Wow. So to me, it's like, those are the business benefits that IT needs to be talking about. You know, what can the platform do to scale the business, scale the revenues, without adding a lot of people? Now, granted, they're a corner case, right? But you know, I think there are a lot of lessons to be taken from that. In the end, who cares what the architecture is, as long as it kind of delivers those kind of business results?
Sure. So that kind of takes us to our next question. You know, when you are a successful SaaS provider, you're getting those customers. You got to scale up your infrastructure. How do you manage that without having more capacity in the cloud than you really need? Arne, I'm picking on you again, but you were pretty much brought from Microsoft to ServiceNow to help them address that question, because that was the kind of growing pains a SaaS company has. Maybe, I don't know how much you can tell us, but what did you have to do when you got in?
Well, yeah, we had a lot to do, but essentially where we landed on this is to get into a very efficient, predictable way to provision capacity. And you know, obviously, you know, infrastructure is expensive, so you don't want to over-provision. At the other hand, the beauty of being in an enterprise business versus consumer business, you know, in a consumer business, you know, your peaks and valleys can be, you know, 2, 3, 4 to 1. The beauty, I mean, it makes the problem simpler for us. It's an enterprise business. These contracts are negotiated, so we have a very good line of sight into a forecasting model. So the first thing we did is to kind of combine the signals from the field, from people that are selling the product to the people that operate the product. And then we built a model to, you still want to have a little bit of headroom. So we built a model based on sales signals. We always build a quarter ahead of capacity. So there's a little bit of cost to that, but that allows us to handle, you know, a quarter where the sales guys are just, you know, blowing through the numbers. So building a very efficient model that's, you know, predictive, looking ahead. We sort of built a machine around this, always having 1 quarter of extra capacity and constantly building out on a quarterly basis.
Okay, anybody else have any thoughts on capacity planning?
So for us, it was actually a very interesting exercise when we started with Splunk Cloud. On one hand, we had all the capacity numbers, all the capacity plans for the on-prem product. And then we also had the business plan of where we want to go to. And then the exercise of merging these two and coming to the point of predicting the capacity you will need, when you will need it, and where you will need it is very, very interesting. I can tell you, you can keep an infinite number of MBA guys busy with something like that. At the same time, I was very clear from the beginning that to me, the user experience is number one. So for me, I want to give the highest possible performance. I want you to love the product. I want you to come back to the product. And to me, that overrides, honestly, everything else.
Okay. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? We've got a ways to go here, but I'm just curious after this discussion we're having, very interesting. Is any questions bubbling up from the audience? Do we have mics? Yes, sir. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was a very, very informative panel discussion. I appreciate all of you. You outlined two of the key issues, security and reliability, for really expanding the flow of, if you will, traffic and the application coming into the cloud. Specifically, I'm talking about the medium and large enterprise companies. They have very specific requirements, specifically from a reliability perspective, 6.9 of reliability. To what extent, my question is, to what extent your establishment, infrastructure can support something like that? It's one end to say that we understand the requirements in these two spaces, security, and the other end, from the way that you are managing these environments, to what extent you can support that kind of a infrastructure reliability and security and expand the business. Thank you.
We're all looking at Arne.
Well, let me, great question, by the way, and let me take a stab at that. You know, availability, we see these SaaS services, certainly the one we provide, it's sort of mission critical to the company. This is what IT, you know, runs on, and of course IT is absolutely mission critical to every enterprise today. You know, hardly an enterprise can operate today if IT is down. So, and that's partly why, you know, we had the discussion before about kind of owning the stack, being able to tune it. So we built something we call advanced high availability, just the way we implemented it. You know, other companies do it different ways. And frankly, it was a very big cost for our, you know, we were a small company 2 years ago, but we decided to take a very big investment to build a combination of physical redundancy, so, you know, East Coast, West Coast US, London, Amsterdam in Europe, et cetera, and then build a set of automation software that can very quickly fail over our customers. So each customer then, using this multi-instance architecture, is provisioned in 2 data centers that are, you know, physically diverse. And then if we have an issue, we have automation that can fail over from one to the other. Now, our actual operation today, we're running at a little over 4 nines availability, so it's increased dramatically over the last 2 years. One of the challenges with enterprises is even though they move to SaaS, they still want to negotiate their contract. They want to see all the terms, availability, security. So every big enterprise sale, even in a SaaS world, is a negotiation, and we try to consolidate into a single set of SLA and security terms. And typically, what we want to do is our SLA guarantee is typically well below our actual, you know, operation. I mentioned we're running at a little over 4 nines, but we want to have a little bit of, just to protect the company financially, we want to have a sort of buffer between where we operate versus kind of what we guarantee. But we're extremely conscious of these availability requirements. I think it's core to how we build a SaaS service.
You mentioned about the 4.9. Specifically the large enterprise companies, at least 5.9, if not closer to 6. Specifically on the strategic applications. If I have a payroll and I move it to the cloud, who cares, even if it's going to be down by 4.9. But if it is a more strategic application, 4.9 is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Correct.
You want to take?
Sure. I mean, I'll take it just a different angle, I suppose. So first of all, if we're talking about our particular application, we drink our own champagne because that's what we do, is the monitoring and management of the performance and uptime of our own applications. Obviously, we've also inherently built in HA availability into the system itself as an application. But I think, let me move a little bit more to your general concerns beyond just our application, because part of what we do is help you measure what any potential problems that are going to come your way could be as well. So beyond just a capacity planning perspective, I think what we try to do is, we've said it ourselves, our customers have said it as well, the market has spoken that good enough is not good enough. So 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines is not really good enough at the end of the day to have a generic 5 nines. Because if you think about what that means, it means that your service provider can actually get away with a lot of variety of downtimes for certain applications. And when you aggregate the time in the grand scheme of things, it's like, oh, I still met my SLA. That's not good enough. So we encourage our enterprise and our service providers alike to actually demand this. If you're an enterprise, demand this of your service provider. Give me a more granular SLA based on the criticality of my application and where it's running. And I trust you, Mr. Cloud Service Provider, but I also want validation. And that's the kind of thing that we try to provide. But what we see more and more of is a lot of your internal IT teams, particularly those that are very development savvy and DevOps savvy, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we want to use your tool not just to tell us about availability, but we want to start, you have to start telling us about health and risk metrics as well. And the algorithms that can build into those health and risk metrics can be very simple or can be as sophisticated and aggressive as you want your teams to be. So we actually have that capability, and at that point our tool stops becoming a tool and starts becoming a platform on top of which customers now start developing, modeling out what that potential risk metrics could be, particularly with services. You could have one server completely go down, right? But your service is still available, but it doesn't mean that it's not performing at an optimal basis, right? And in the future, we can also tell you that you're going to start having problems. And I'm just going to say one more thing as well, and that is, what we're also seeing is, amongst our more aggressive customers who are very much in tune with how to use these tools, they're sort of saying to themselves, you know what, not only am I going to look at performance, but I'm also going to look at the cost of that performance and start comparing it apples to apples across the board. So even with Amazon, for example, what we're able to give our customers is sort of say, you know what, this instance is now dependent on 6 or 7 different Amazon services in zone 1. I'm going to be able to show apples to apples comparisons about the same kind of instance that would run in different zones as well. So you start to get a performance and cost metric. Now that doesn't save you. If everything goes down, it goes down. And at that point, I have to put the onus back on the customer and say, well, you know the risks, right? Mechanically and electronically, things fail. You have to have a DR plan in place. But if you could have some sort of vision going forward that gives you an indication of the risk, that could be extremely helpful for you. And I think that's where a lot of these tools are moving now.
Okay, another question.
Question really for Kevin. I think one of the things you mentioned was an ISV going to become a SaaS provider is going to be dealing with a different revenue stream. And the question is, are there third parties that want to participate in the financing of a migration like that?
That's a great question. A lot of companies that we deal with are actually private equity owned. And so what's interesting is if you catch a company that's kind of in the middle of an investment cycle, they have to manage that EBITDA. We need the profit to pay off the debt service that we've got. So it's hard for them to innovate. But one of the things we're seeing right now is some more, I guess, enlightened private equity firms are now, prior to getting into the investment, are realizing, we've got to transform this infrastructure in this company, and we're going to have to put aside that capital to do that. And I think if any of you have seen any of these cost models where people migrate, there's this huge drop in revenues because all of a sudden you're getting your payments over time. So it's this deferred revenue that really kind of, I think, is a bump in the road for many of the companies. So private equity guys are starting to do this. There are a number of other companies that finance firms that are trying to go through this transition. I will tell you, if I had a magic wand, I think there's a huge opportunity in the market for companies to help ISVs transition. There are so many companies right now that still have really great products, but would like to be in the cloud, would like to create a SaaS business, but they don't have the capital to do it. So I think if, stay tuned, over the next 5 years, I think you are going to start seeing a lot more of that.
Okay. Is there another question from the audience? Or looks like we have another question.
There was this conversation about multi-instance versus multi-tenant, right? And I think that's very interesting. Obviously, the challenges are technical, business, and operational. I think more on the business side, from a customer acquisition standpoint, when does a customer prefer one versus the other? And and then how do you kind of translate how you operate if you want to provide a service for these different types of customers? Or what exactly would be in a customer's requirement that they would prefer, a multi-instance? I'm pretty sure most customers would want to do that. But when would they be okay with a multi-tenant, or they don't, or it doesn't matter?
Okay, let me take a pass. Yeah. So since I live in both worlds, multi-tenant, as somebody pointed out, if you have millions of customers, tens of thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of customers, those are typically lower revenue numbers per customer. For us, the single tenant environment comes with generally many physical machines, many virtual machines. And at that point in time, it just doesn't make any sense to squish a couple of hundred of smaller customers on top of the environment that you already have dedicated for your large customer, because the potential for error, mistake, and anything else is way higher than the cost saving that you will achieve by doing that. And especially in Splunk world, I mean, we are talking about terabytes of data per day being sent by a single customer to the system. And this whole economy of scale that you can get when you have many smaller customers doesn't really come into play for big customers.
My take on that is, and obviously we sell to fairly large enterprises. They're not really. That's not the question, or that I hear them asking us. It's not the architecture. It's mainly about security. How do you ensure my data has integrity? How do you make sure it's in the right location? How do you make sure it's encrypted, et cetera? So it's starting more from a compliance and security perspective. They're not coming in and saying, I want this type of architecture. They're asking, how do you protect my data? How do you make sure it's isolated? And that sort of led us to the specific architecture we built.
So yeah, that's from our perspective. The vast majority of our customers have their own deployment and they have their own instance, an internal SaaS if you want, even amongst the service providers, who are then in turn turning around and deploying, again, a SaaS to their downstream customers or constituents themselves. So we sort of enable them to create that SaaS themselves. So what I mean is, if you're an enterprise, you would have one instance dedicated to your company as an organization, and then you're deciphering out who gets to see what. From a security perspective, because security remains probably the number one deciding factor as to whether you want to be on I presume, just to crudely put your question in a different way, whether you want to be on a shared environment or not. So security is number one, depending on the kind of data that you're putting in there. But I'd say, again, second to that is the performance that you expect out of that data, because you don't want a noisy neighbor impacting you. So you've got to decide how IO intensive that application is, and that data that's driving it and feeding it. And how secure it is. It's perpetually a balancing act. I would suggest that we are at an era where we're not seeing, dare I say it, too much vulnerability within these shared environments, at least from the data layer perspective. So again, I go back to, it's probably more a problem of performance. You have to talk about security, but you face the real problems of performance if it's something that matters to you.
Yeah, the one other thing I would just kind of throw out there for consideration, you mentioned customer acquisition. Most SaaS companies offer 30-day trials, or try our software before you buy it. One of the areas to consider too about having, let's say, maybe not a multi-tenant environment is, how are you going to provision a lot of trials? If you've got 50, 100, 300 running at a time, how many people are you going to need to do that? So one of the things we always talk to our clients about is that if you want a lot of people to try your products, there's an economic benefit to having it in a multi-tenant environment. It's a lot easier to manage. Turn them on, turn them off, provision them, turn them off. You can do it with a much smaller team. So that's kind of another consideration to take a look at.
Okay. Was there another question from the audience, or ready to move on? Okay. All right. My next question is about platform as a service. If you saw in the slides I ran through in the beginning, that's always the one that's lagging behind the rest of the market, right? It's not as many people are doing that as they are doing SaaS, as they are doing infrastructure as a service. But it seems to me from what I cover, I mean, once the SaaS provider gets up and running, customers want to customize that environment. They want to build add-on applications on top of that environment. If the SaaS vendor is successful, like ServiceNow, other ISVs want to partner with that vendor. They want to build on that platform. So the SaaS vendor has to open the platform then, and let customers, let partners build extensions, build applications on top of that. Arne, I'm going to pick on you again because I know you guys are, that's a big thing for you right now, the platform, right?
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely, Dennis. And what's really key is, the old, I spent many years in IT myself, and the legacy problems of having, thousands of applications that are isolated islands of information. When you move to the cloud, you don't want to repeat those same mistakes. So what we found is it's not sufficient to just be a SaaS provider. You need to have a platform underneath, and that's sort of how our system was built. It's a platform for application development. We built a suite of apps ourselves using that platform for IT service management. And what we found is our customers started to sort of organically extend, modify, build their own applications on the platform because you want to run IT as an integrated environment. So having that open platform, being able to modify our SaaS applications, add your own applications to the mix to solve specific problems. The other thing we're working on is actually integrating between our SaaS solution and other SaaS solutions. We're talking to you guys about that right now. So I think in this new world of SaaS and cloud, one thing I think we need to fix as an industry is not repeat what happened sort of behind the firewall with all these isolated applications, and having a very rich platform where you can extend, integrate, build your own apps. I think it's absolutely vital. SaaS can't be a static application in the cloud. Then you really didn't solve any problems.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to jump on that very quickly, and I'm just going to say that I think we hear a lot about open source systems still today, and people jump on it. Open source system, that's where we want to go because we want to create our own cloud or something like that and drop our costs as much as possible. And again, it's an old mantra, open source is not free. Right? You need the support sooner or later, and you need a more mature integrated product. However, having said that, I think that an open architecture and a highly extensible architecture is key to the future of all software vendors, particularly those of us sitting on stage here. You have to have an open, extensible architecture like you were just talking about. And at that point, the more open you are, the more of a platform you become for your enterprise consumer. So we're in an API-driven economy. I mean, we see it now. We are displacing management systems all the time that were traditionally agent-based, because it's too, a lot of those legacy tools and legacy products from even 5 or 10 years ago just aren't making the cut in this new cloud era anymore, right? The fluidity and the flexibility you have to have, hello?
The Weinman hook.
Hook is coming in.
You have to be able to integrate with partnerships because nobody does it all, right? You have to be able to future-proof your customers as well, and your customers have to know. We have customers, for example, that leverage our single API. And use us to do all the hard work on the back end to bring it all together as a platform.
Okay. I'd like to thank the Academy.
Thank
you very much. Great panel. Really appreciate it.
Very much.